Hello, my name is Chris. I run Gamesindustry.biz, and I'm actually pretty intimidated by this session because it's a really important one. Last year at this event, we got a sense from educators that the industry just isn't doing enough to support students to bridge that skills gap. We also got a sense that for some studios, education is not providing the talent the business needs, and there are challenges facing both sides as to why this situation persists. There is no quick fix. That was the conclusion. It's about taking small but meaningful steps to improve things, steps that have been made harder this year because of the pandemic. To discuss this and hopefully create some key takeaways, we have a wonderful panel of experts with us, including Anna from Portsmouth University, Charlie from Bournemouth, Kieran from Sumo Digital, and Meg from Codemasters. But we want you to join in too. So if you're on the Discord, if you're not, head on over to the Discord, join the session channel. And if you've got any questions or thoughts, stick them in there and we'll hopefully get to speak about them. We also have a poll that's going live about now, I think, where we want your feedback into what you would like to see more of. There it is. So anyway, well, hello panel.
Hello.
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 I want to start by talking what everyone talks about, which is coronavirus. We can't escape it, no matter how hard we try. And it's already changing how games are being made. It's created a world where students are now learning remotely and games are being created in much the same way. My company just did the Best Place to Work Awards judging, and pretty much everyone that took part in those awards said they were going to move to a world where they'd be more remote working. So let's begin by talking about that. What do students need to know about this, and how can we sort of prepare them on both sides of the divide? Meg, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, sure. So over at Codemasters, we're very lucky. We're a large studio and we have continued to hire throughout this period. For other smaller studios, especially, it's been a little bit harder for them. What we found, I think, the biggest challenge for us is, you said there actually, Chris, it sort of changed the way we've made games. To a large degree, I don't want to disagree straight up, but it hasn't much. But what it has changed hugely is how we communicate. And that's been the biggest challenge, really. So with regards to COVID, in particular, the new advent of being so remote from people, we've found that particularly those with less working experience than more experienced professionals, is that they're not used to that level of communication. So it would really benefit both the students themselves coming out of uni, for any walk of life actually, to be already aware and quite polished in communication generally, yeah. But upward and proactive communication. It's really key that they provide a high level of transparency over what they're doing. And basically until their line manager says, look, I'm fed up with hearing from you. You don't need to keep telling me what you're doing. And because probably at that point, they've got it about right. I think that's been a challenge for us. If a junior, I'll start using those sort of air bunny quotes, with less experience, doesn't really understand, that perhaps they're getting on with their work and they might be doing a fantastic job, but if they're not communicating that to their line manager or their team or their wider interfaces, that can be a problem. And it is traditionally one of the things that you learn on the job when you take that first job out of uni. You learn how to work. Really, we need these people coming out of unis who can hit the ground running on that score already.
Anyone got anything to add?
Yeah, I think for our students, certainly, particularly our final year students, were in the middle of a year-long live client project when lockdown hit. So we're actually presented with a really useful opportunity to think about how they communicated with each other and worked with each other, how often they actually needed to communicate with each other, and to kind of what level of detail and source control, things like that. And what we emphasised with them is that actually what they were suddenly being able to offer to industry was this experience that they'd had of being able to do that and how they'd done that and focusing on that. And we've tweaked our curriculum going forwards because we see that there's probably going to be more of this, and that actually these are really useful skill sets for them to learn. So I'd certainly be placing more emphasis on that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A lot of useful skill sets have come from this. And like you said, Meg, at the various studios within Sumo Digital, quite similar. It's not changed necessarily how we make the games, but it's made us take a long, hard look at ourselves and think about how we change, how we communicate, and what systems, channels, processes we have in place to make that communication effective. And talking specifically about students, graduates, interns coming into the industry, that is challenging, isn't it? Because a lot of that comes from being next to a senior, being near a lead, those ad hoc conversations, that kind of just reaching out and saying, I'm thinking I'm going to solve this challenge this way. Is it right? What would you do? They're gone. So what do we replace those moments with? And I think we probably all agree it took us a while to land on the right balance. But no, the outcome has been actually greater productivity, much better alignment of some of the teams, because we're having to think about when we're communicating, what we're communicating, and put thought into it before it happens. And we've created some really good channels for those communications to go through. These kind of situations breed innovation, don't they? We have to adapt, and I think we've all done that. I've heard some really good stories come from Cody's, from Playground, from a couple of the other guys in the industry, and we're doing what we can to continue to make games, because we need to continue to make games. They're still a requirement.
Yeah, there's some really interesting challenges that are raised by the whole COVID crisis. I mean, obviously for educators, for us, there is a challenge of moving towards at least some, if not all, of our classes being virtual. And, there's a lot of work involved in that. But I feel like we're getting there with that, right? We are making some good progress. One of the more difficult things, though, as was mentioned in an earlier panel today, is being able to support our students and also help our students through things like socializing, mental health challenges, support, help, things like that. It's really difficult when you have a COVID crisis on. There is a literal distance between you and your students that makes that harder to do. However, I am really pleased to hear you say, Meg, about the importance of communication, particularly in this crisis, because I think you're absolutely right. And we need to, and something I've been championing, in fact, is to try and give our students a range of different communication skills, because it's not just about being able to do one form of communication anymore. You need to be good at written communication, at live video communication like we're doing now, at pre-prepared video communication, and trying to give students a well-rounded set of communication skills.
Meg and Kieran, has the pandemic, has it impacted your sort of desire to invest in sort of unproven talent, or has it not changed at all?
For me, for Sumo, and I imagine it's probably the same answer from Meg, but I'll let you go as well, is a big fat no. We need to continue to develop talent. We're growing. We need to bring as many folks through from that bench strength of students all the way through the rest of the pipeline. It's a big requirement for us as an industry, for us as a bunch of studios. So it's a big no. It's a case of how we adapt, both in attracting and putting ourselves out there and creating the right channels for folks to grow. And I think you've raised a good point, Charlie, again, around how we support them holistically, beyond the giving them the tools to be successful to code or to do art. It's how we support them settling into a new life, which is entering the workspace. And yeah, there's a lot to be done there, but it certainly hasn't changed our appetite. It's just made us have to think differently about how we do it.
Yeah, totally echo that, Kieran. I think certainly on the graduate, the sort of graduate and beyond, internships, slightly different ball game. I know we're gonna cover that, yeah. But I think as well, to earlier points made, that combination of multiple channels of communication and being able to spin those plates very quickly and understand the different types of communication and what's appropriate for when. Yes, you've got a report that might take you a week to write, but you've also got maybe Microsoft Teams or something where it's a quick message, you're instant. Usually there's layers of communication, and it's getting students to understand that and how to utilize those effectively. We definitely want to continue to invest in new talent, and it's absolutely one of our huge focuses. In particular, let's face it, Brexit's on the way as well again. So it's going to make things a bit more challenging. So we'll be looking all the more at homegrown university-fed talent for the industry.
Oh, that's good to hear. Well, Brexit isn't good to hear. But I'll move on from that. Well, thank you for giving me a wonderful segue into the internship section of our chat, because that was one of the big it's already been one of the big conversations of today, but it was definitely one of the big conversations from last year, internships and work placements, and it's potentially been made harder, as you alluded to, with the current pandemic. But they're clearly very useful. My brother, who actually works at Sumo, that's how he got into the games industry, and it was very effective for him. But it takes up a lot of time for a studio, particularly if you're on the smaller ones. What can be done to sort of make this more palatable for developers to be able to do more of these? I mean, Charlie, I know you've got some views
on internships and placements. So yeah. Sure, this was a, as you say, a big conversation last year. I think in the COVID climate, as we find ourselves, this remains something that is important, valuable, but also still viable. I appreciate there are definitely challenges in running distance internships and placements, but in the same way that staffs for companies and studios are now working from home virtually, or in some cases, we also need to make that the case for our students as well. Indeed, one of the long-term impacts I anticipate from the COVID crisis is that companies are going to be increasingly working remotely. I don't think it's going to go that way entirely, but that we are going to see situations where staff are working that way. So being able to provide a virtual internship is indeed actually a new part of the valuable education of our students. They need to learn how to work effectively in that situation where you're dealing with your organization at distance. And yeah, much as we in universities will always do all we can to properly round and educate our students in the best way possible, there are certain skills and certain experiences that have to come from a placement or a bit of time in industry. And I think learning to work effectively with a studio from home is exactly one of those skills.
Do you have anything sort of to add to that, Anna?
No, I'd agree very much. The home working skills and actually that sort of that self-discipline, that kind of remote communicating with the team, and really, as I said, we were trying to replicate it here, but it's like, is that what the studios are actually doing? And I think although we're coming to the what do we need from industry, one of those things that we need to have some conversations with industry is about how are you doing it now, as opposed to how we think you're probably doing it now. So
how are you doing it
now? So I guess for Sumo, and again, I'm probably talking on behalf of lots of other folks in our seat, the key goal for internships it's been probably threefold. One is giving students some real world experience of putting a theory that they've learned into practice, ideally on real world projects where possible. And the second most obvious one is allowing us to identify the talent that we'd like to bring back at the end of their course, provide a conditional offer to them, say, come back and join us. There's a few other pieces in there as well. We love to create the brand and create brand ambassadors to send back to universities and all those great things. But it's the first point now. How we get those skills across remotely is a lot more challenging for interns. Grads may be a slightly different story. It's an ongoing topic. I wish I'd come to this panel with an answer of what we're doing, but we're looking at a few different options in terms of what we can do, which includes stuff we might get to in point 3, so we might come back to this, but around creating real life projects for, I don't know, someone in code and art who wants to come in and help us build some tools around art, so developing toward becoming some kind of a tech artist or something like that, and allowing them to work on projects that aren't on actual projects, but will help us to help our developers develop better, and essentially assigning projects to groups of interns that we then allow them to work on, scope out, present back, continue to work on based on feedback, present back again at the end. We give them a grade, we give them some kind of outcome for it. They can then bring that back to university and say, this is what I've created. So that's kind of a quite specific random example, but we're thinking about what else we can do that isn't working specifically on projects when it is a bit more challenging. We want to use the time we've got with these interns to give them some real life experience based on what they've learned.
I think that's a critical point actually that Kieran's kind of touching on there as well is the value for us about what those interns bring back when they come back into their final year, and actually in that sense of that sort of learning community, what they feed back to the rest of the student cohort from their experience. And we use a live client project with a studio brief with Rare this year, and actually one of the students who'd done the internship was on that project team and mentored by Rare staff, but what they were therefore achieving and that experience that not just she but the whole team then had as a result was quite stunning.
Oh, wow.
Interesting point that actually it's something that this came up actually this time last year. I think we were in Sheffield. Codemasters have always very strongly favoured a slightly varied model of the internship as a bridge between university and work rather than a mid-course option. So we tend to have hired, for that very reason, we have in the past favoured some of the European universities that have the internship at the end. And yeah, of course, we give them a few days off to go out and graduate and have a party and whatnot. But actually, they come to us as pretty much a full-time member of staff at that point. The overheads in hiring, bringing people in are completely, we understand the value of it, but they are quite a luxury when you're making a game, So from that point of view, the size and shape of it for us has always been that we prefer a final year. And actually with the remote aspects, that's not really changed. So it's not actually impacted our feelings about interns. In fact, similar and related point is that we actually prefer somebody longer term. So it's unlikely that Codemasters would go down to sort of up to a 6-month duration. We much prefer 9 months as an absolute minimum, probably 12 months. And I'm talking months rather than academic years here. So I'm not saying that we won't shift on that and that we may have to, but that has certainly been the thing that suits our business the most so far.
Yeah, that's interesting because, again, I'm going to keep mentioning him. I hope he's not watching. He'll be very embarrassed. My brother, who works at Sumo, he was at Bath University. He did an internship at Lionhead initially before they went down, then went to Sumo, and then was at Sumo for 3 months, went back to university for a year, and then straight as university finished, he was back at Sumo now as an employee. So for him, it felt like he had to go back to education for a year to get the job, which he was pretty much sure he already had. Is there a reason why it's done that way? Is there other obstacles behind doing that end of year course internship?
I think for us traditionally, there's that between the second and third year, there is that year to go out into industry, and that's for us, I think, historically where it's come from. That said, this year we had final year students who were on internships who remained where they were and completed the final year of their degree with us at the same time, where all of their final year projects, everything was aligned to what they were actually doing in the studios that they were working in, so that it was kind of meaningful and purposeful. And then they then stayed in employment with the studios after they'd graduated, and that seems to have worked very well for them as well. But we do have graduates going into internships and doing it that way as well.
I think it's there are sort of two different things here, right? There's early graduate recruitment and placements, and I think some people in higher education, because actually, funny enough, Meg, after I think it was you actually that said last year about this idea of having the tailing internship at the end, and that was one of the things I took back to my department. And I remember discussing it with some people at the time. There were some questions of what is really the difference here then between a placement and just hiring a young graduate. And I think the idea here is that placements mid-degree have a value in of itself, because it allows them to not get too stuck into the ways of just doing stuff at university. It breaks up halfway through the course. It also allows them to then contextualize the things they're doing in their final year with skills and things they've learned from industry. As Anna was saying, when you go on to do your magnus opum, as it were, your masterpiece in your project at the end, being able to do that with skills you've got from industry makes that an even more impressive and even more well-rounded piece of work. But that's not to say I don't completely recognise what you're saying from Codemasters about the value of actually having someone with an extra year under their belt to be able to do it, and also to have them for a longer period of time. I get that, okay? But there are some reasons for why universities like this mid-degree placement as well.
Sounds like there's a compromise though. Somewhere.
I think this is the thing. I think there's two separate things here, and they're both valuable in their own way. Okay, I think we just need to find a way to support them both.
Yeah, and there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all studios either. You know, we're speaking as a big studio where, you know, our project life cycle is 2 years. That's not the case if you're a mobile developer, you know, or a casual game developer. It's a completely different thing. So, yeah, it's the longevity, I think, of specifically our titles. And because we're niche within a niche, you know, it's racing within console, etc. I mean, obviously we're multi-platform, but you know what I'm saying. And that level of depth, plus we develop our own game engine. So there's just a few levels of complexity that make, you know, as all the games businesses have their own reasons for being unique, and that's our set. And I completely understand the value of a student going back to the university and bringing that back too. And that's something we like to encourage. So alumni of previous universities, we do like them to go back and speak. We like them to be invited. So, that should be a pretty, you know, a no-brainer really for any course leader. You know, anyone who's gone into industry, you should be tapping them up every year, and you know, and someone like myself and Kieran will facilitate that. But if we're not asked, trust me, we're busy enough that we don't probably get onto it.
It isn't just me, Meg. Yeah.
Well, we've got Anna in the Discord. She's got a couple of questions. Question to Anna.
Okay.
Sorry, I read that wrong. Could those who took internships mid-course have been offered a job, and would that have been dependent on gaining the degree?
Yes, that's happened a number of times actually, that the job offer has stood for when they've completed. What I'm not entirely sure is whether it was dependent on completing.
When we do it, we typically do, Anna, just assume, but every studio is different, aren't they? Every employer is different.
I have to say, we haven't had the situation where they didn't complete it to find out if that wasn't the case. But yes, that basically it's go and finish, and then we'll welcome you back when you're done.
Yeah.
And I've got a second question, Anna, for you. The third year vocational model sounds fascinating. Did the final year assessments require much work to rearrange in order to reflect their internship?
No, not really. I mean, I can give you an example. So we had a student on my producer module who had been doing an internship with Natural Motion. So instead of working on a live client project with our students, he worked on a project with them and applied all of the production stuff and assessments that we were doing to that project that he was working on. And his final year project, or kind of dissertation as you will, was also focused around the work that he'd been doing with them. And they were great. They really supported him doing that and made sure that he'd got the time for the study time as well. His one bit of feedback about it was a bit tricky because sometimes, particularly from a production point of view, he missed some of the team meetings in the studio, and he kind of felt he was playing catch up, but that overall the experience had been well worth doing. But no, for us, we try and leave these things flexible enough that we can work to sort of individual student situations.
Brilliant. Well, I'm gonna move the conversation on to let's get down to it, shall we? I'll start with Meg and Kieran. What do you need from education in order to bridge that skills gap that you're currently not getting?
Deafening silence. I tell you what, I'll follow it on from the point I made earlier, because it is quite specific, this, to Codemasters, and I appreciate that this, I'm not speaking for all the industry, of course, by any means. I mean, I think with a larger developer such as ourselves, who have, most of our titles are developed with a bespoke game engine per title. And for that reason, we don't find a lot of transferable skills between courses that offer the more off-the-shelf generic games engine opportunities and to then bring that into the world of work within Codemasters, we tend to favour students and graduates who have got more computer science understanding, and it's those computer languages that they get, and they then apply that knowledge to a game engine, rather than being, you know, a Unity expert and then trying to reverse engineer that and unpack it and apply it to another game. So I understand that there's a lot of universities offering a lot of courses, and that the barrier to entry for the more technical aspects on programming in particular, the barrier to entry is very high. It's not for everyone, and not everyone, newsflash, is going to be bright enough to do these jobs. Not me, by the way. So, you know, I'm not trying to be snooty here, but, you know, these people, the men and women who work on these games are hugely talented. So coming away from the easier game engine options, I think, of course, a student needs to gain confidence and make games, right? Of course they do. No harm in them knowing Unity and picking up that early on. But I think by the time they graduate or are ready for an internship, they should be understanding whereabouts they fit. Now, if they're going for a more casual title range or genre, fine, that's going to suit you. But if you want something in depth with your own game engine development, you really must be very early on looking at a very technical specialism for what you do. That's also outside of programming, applicable more generally. We do find a lot of graduates come out a little bit wide-eyed with a games degree, and it's like, what do you want to do? We do need those third years to understand a little bit more about the specialisms of roles, because they will go immediately into deployment. We don't have a general pool. A smaller games dev might, a small indie might. If you've got 20 people working on a game, roll your sleeves up, you're doing everything. But in Codemasters, we've got departments for this. And so you need to know where you're targeting and what kind of job you actually want well before you graduate. So I think that's probably the two areas that I would highlight most.
Cool. And you nailed something there for me, Meg, which is why I really enjoy working in this industry, is the number of highly intelligent people we get to work with throughout. It's incredible. And I'm glad you went first, because you've been in this industry a lot longer than I have. And I'm a relatively new entrant to the industry. So I wanted to just get your take on it, make sure I didn't say anything that was out of the ordinary, but also get a steer. So I think I agree with all of those things, and I won't repeat any of them, because I think that they're all absolutely true and very relevant to Sumo as well. The conversation around engines, we've got 8 studios in the UK working on Unity, Unreal, some proprietary engines, and some on our own engine. So again, getting students coming out with Unity and Unreal is great and super useful, but there are certain uses for it in certain areas where there isn't. And a lot of our focus is similar. It's on a lot of computer sciences and getting really bright kids in, and then teaching them the tools, which is super helpful. I guess just to add to that, rather than repeat anything, the additional things that really help these students become super well-rounded and come in and be able to do the job we're asking them to do, but get an idea of the impact it's having on a wider scale, is some level of either full game dev cycle stuff, some of the commercials around what they're doing, what it means, where revenue gets generated from this work, and it just puts them in a place where they understand what they're doing today and what they can potentially do in the future, what they can build, what they can become, and all those really exciting things, but the impact that all has beyond what they do today. So that we got really smart kids coming through this program, and they're going to be coming up with great ideas and new tools and blah, blah, blah. And that will help them put forward ones that really do have a positive impact, and make really smart decisions when they go forward. So I'm just thinking about, I remember, was it Birmingham University had like a separate organization that built and sold games, and I think Steel Minions in Sheffield did a similar thing. So it's those types of extracurricular, taking kids out, going beyond the game jam and adding the commercials into it is a real big help as well, in addition to everything Meg said.
That's interesting. You touched on something there as well, Kieran, about the the full life cycle. And just to add to that and embellish that, definitely full life cycle, but in a collaboration team in the size and shape that a games team would have and the functions they're in. You know, so we want people who have worked with a producer, who understand what the game director is setting the vision and the design elements, who understand the level design, who understand extra everything, all of that sort of full life cycle. We all know there's not that many role families, we call them, in the games industry, but they're very clear, and it's great if they've worked together. So the ones that emulate, as you say, Kieran, the ones that emulate an actual studio environment and do it on a microcosmic way, that's the best, because they understand how this game came about in its different life cycle iterations. It also helps that collaboration with the communication that we were talking about at the very beginning, and that how important the proactivity around that communication is as well, for sure.
Actually, to your point, it helps them get clarity on what areas they want to put their focus in, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
I think that's quite interesting as well, because as I said, we do a year-long life client project at the end in teams, and one of the other things that we feel they gain from it is the ability to work with and communicate with a client, and work with a brief and how they interpret that brief, which are all skills that are quite useful, sometimes kind of get missed. So absolutely, that sort of the experience of going through the whole development life cycle is really what we've been trying to achieve.
Just to recognise and sort of cap the discussion here a little bit, just so I make sure I understand what I'm taking back, almost, as it were. But yeah, I completely recognise what you're saying there, Meg and Kieran, about students understanding fundamentals more rather than just specific tools that are off the shelf. I mean, I think there's place for both of these in the education cycle. I mean, we use things like Unity and Unreal to give students pretty much actually the experience of developing a full game from beginning to end in a way that they can do within a unit. But obviously, like our games programming and software engineering students also have low-level programming fundamentals, building their own game engines and things like that, which you can't escape if that's what you want to do. So, I think it's an interesting and good thing for me to take away, that there is this need for a focus on fundamentals, whether that be the fundamentals of an engine and programming or on other sides of in the industry.
And Connor raises a good point in the Discord, because I guess Meg and I are coming at this from a fairly big studios, discipline-specific perspective, but there is an awful lot of developers out there that will develop a game in groups of 2 and 3. There's hundreds of them out there, and that's, I guess, where the specialism knowledge is less relevant. It's a really difficult decision to make at this age. Do I want to go down the Cody's route? Do I want to go down the indie route? And try and have a skill set across the board. Most of our developers often do. They come in and they'll work on design, tech art, whatever it might be, but actually have a fairly strong skill set across the board, and then take out and do something on their own in the future. But certainly for the Megs, the Kierans of this world, that specialist knowledge is vital.
Okay.
We'd definitely be hearing something other, as you say, Kieran and Charlie, to your point, that, you know, if you had a small indie dev here, they'd be saying, no, forget that. We want a generalist who can do a bit.
I should have been invited to this panel.
and just, you know, we probably should have that as well. But listen, we acknowledge that. But a lot of this is you've got to wind back to what your student actually wants in their life, you know, because you know, we're in the luxurious, Sumo and ourselves, we're in a luxurious position where we can say, yes, it's AAA console games, it's big titles and huge IP, wonderful, that's lucky for us. Mm-hmm. But there's plenty of room in the games industry for people who are not on the fancy end of things and who have a fantastic career and are wonderfully creative, making brilliant games. So, you know, there's no question that it's a very big smorgasbord, but speaking very selfishly, that's what we want.
Sure. I think we all understand that we come from different perspectives here and there is a range of different needs, but it's great to hear from you specifically what you...
Well, I want to make sure I get the chance for the educators to hit back before we have to wrap up. So the reverse question for Charlie and Anna, what do you need from the games industry that you're currently not getting?
So I used my place on this panel last year to make a call for greater involvement from the industry in research. And I'm going to bore you all by doing that again this year. I see research as a fundamental part of the skills gap of education. We talk a lot about undergraduates, and obviously very important. We do all we can to raise the quality of that and do everything we can to give them opportunities. But there is also this question of how do we bring in people beyond just the sort of entry-level graduate level. How do we create the specialists of the next generation in games? If you want a specialist in artificial intelligence or UX or maybe high-level graphics or something, that may come from a research program. And I see there is also an aspect here, not just of educating individual people, but of educating us as a sector. The game sector here learns and figures out new skills, new technologies by conducting research and development. So this is not something, because I know, Chris, you phrased this as something that we need that we're not getting. We are getting this a bit. There is obviously some engagement with research from industry, but something I want to amplify and increase is a greater involvement on this level. So this could be at any number of different ways. It would be great to see at the high level, big studios getting involved in research projects, perhaps lending their expertise to the research, getting involved in KTP programs where we can work with you to transfer some of the stuff from research into the studio, or funding PhD positions, okay? But there's often a match-funded PhD culture in games academia, so we can create PhD students who are skilled in areas that you want, or even look at taking one of your staff and getting them a research qualification so they have those research skills to take back to you. Or on the smaller end of the scale, even just getting involved in something like the steering committee of a research project. Research projects often have these committees of people that help steer the research, and having the voice of a games company on those panels is, one, incredibly valuable for the research. It actually helps us make sure that what we're discovering is useful for the studios, but two, it greatly increases the chance of the stuff getting funded in the first place. If I'm going out there and talking to research councils and trying to get them to give up money to fund games research, then they'll want to see that the industry is involved and interested enough in this to sort of support it. So yeah, I'm once again putting the flag up here and saying that undergraduate education really important, but research is a big part of the skills gap and education as well. And if I could ask studios here to do one thing, it would be to reach out to either your local games department or a games department anywhere in the country and get involved in that research in some way.
Okay, that sounds like I mean, it sounds quite like a fairly sensible idea. We're growing 10% year on year as an industry. There is a big gap in terms of how much we're growing as an industry and how much the pool of available talent is growing. So any activities like this that's gonna generate better outcomes.
Absolutely. It's partly the learning, it's the knowledge. Yeah. So what we're actually learning as a sector, but it's also the people. Yeah. Game studios want to hire people who aren't just fresh graduates, but also specialists in particular areas that are on the cutting edge, that maybe even bring those research skills in. And that's research programs, whether it be a PhD student or a researcher that's just completed a research project in a collaboration, are these people. So, yeah. And
I'd imagine it's probably happening in quite a fragmented way at the moment, isn't it? It's one studio, one PhD, one university and school, but yeah, I'll take it away.
Great.
Okay.
Anna, so it's the first year I've done this. It's the first time I've heard that plea. So
all enthusiasm. Talk to you about it afterwards, Kieran, if you've got some ideas.
What about you, Anna?
Yes, so something that we did this year, which has had a huge impact, was actually collaborating on curriculum design with a studio. So the aforementioned production unit, I went up to Rare and spent a couple of days with the lovely Melissa Knox, and we sat and looked at my curriculum or proposed curriculum for this module, and she didn't pull any punches, but she said, no, this is what I need from a producer, this is what we need. And so between us, we came up with this this sort of curriculum content, but also sort of relevant and useful assessments that really met the learning objectives and things that I needed for the module, but also reflected what people in industry are looking for. So we felt it was pretty robust going forwards. The added advantage was that it gave it additional credibility to the students, because they felt it had an industry touch to it. And there's nothing like, you know, when you sit there and talk about production documentation being really important and they kind of roll their eyes at you like their mum. But if industry said, well, you know, that's really important. The university also, it gave it credibility with the university. But more importantly, because they'd had that experience of producing on a live client project all year round, our graduate employment was superb out of that unit. And, you know, some of the feedback that we had from the employers of these students was that unit had really made a difference to them, the maturity, the way that they approached their interviews and etc. So I think there's so much scope there. It's easy for us to sit here and think about what we think should be in the curriculum, but if we've got that input coming from industry as well, then it's kind of, there's a much better sort of synergy between it.
Wow.
Anna, that's dead exciting, actually. And you know, literally, if I got phone calls from people like yourself in universities asking for curriculum input, I'd find you people. We'll do, you know, we'll have to talk after this, but this is where universities miss a trick, because they exist at times on a sort of parallel track to you know, to the commercial world, and we have to bridge those gaps. That's what we're here for. But a lot of it is because commerciality, we've got stuff that's going on in the academic year, we've got stuff that's going on in the commercial sphere, but the reach outs is where it's difficult. And I wouldn't know where to start on how do I get people from my local universities to increase what we need in a curriculum, or at least help and give our view. How do we do that? And I wouldn't know where to start unless someone rang me.
I will. I mean, I think the other really important thing is that out of that as we sort of discussed previously, it didn't cost any money, other than their time and their expertise and my time. It was also just spending time together, for us to go and spend time in the studios to see, you know, because you sort of pour out the anecdotes, but actually it's like, is that still what's happening in industry? It's really useful, and it brings so much more, those sort of useful anecdotes to our teaching as well. It sort of brings it much more alive for the students.
It's really important, because you guys work so hard to give these people the tools that they need to be successful. But that's, I guess, where we come in to facilitate conversations, to make sure you're giving them the right tools. So yeah, agreed. I think if you were to reach out to anybody in Meg and my capacity in most studios, they'd be super keen to facilitate that. And if they're not, it's their loss, and we'll pop in and support, because that's the most important thing. Brexit, I mean, it's a big issue for us, right? And the new point system coming in, and that potentially impacting our ability to recruit people from the European universities. It's probably opened our eyes to the fact that we need to work much harder together to bridge the gap. To you use the description of this conversation, and there is some gaps. So I think, like Meg, we'd be very happy to have a conversation and facilitate conversations with experts internally.
Great. I'm very conscious. Sorry, I'm very conscious of the time. We have about 1 minute left. But has the poll been finished? Have we got the results of the poll? Can we see the results of the poll? What do people want? They want more internships and work placements. No surprise. Oh, there's the studios to co-develop courses. That's things, and more apprenticeship or student sponsorships. We've not really got onto that. And then obviously you take part in career jams, not so much on the soft skills side. And increase engagement in research projects, a bit low there, but perhaps that was before your impassioned plea, Charlie.
That's okay. I'm here to convince people.
Well, I mean, there is a question left, but I think we'll have to save that. So if any of the panelists want to jump into the Discord and answer that, it's about whether or not there'd been any progress since last year conversation. But I think that's all we've got time for. I've learned some things. I think, let's focus on soft skills and communication to manage pandemic remote learning. We need to find a compromise on how internships work, perhaps a little bit. For studios for universities looking to get their students into AAA studios, teach the fundamentals of game development over necessarily specific tools and technology. In industry, please get involved in research, or Charlie will be very upset, and obviously work with universities in helping create the curriculum. The conversation doesn't have to stop there. Well, join us now in the Discord, continue the conversation, and if we can come up with more ways, see if we can come up with more ways that the business and education can work together to bridge the skills gap. That's all we've got time for. Thank you to all our panelists for being fantastic, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Wonderful chat.
Thank you.